Good morning, sir. Am I audible?
Good morning, sir. Is it audible, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
So we'll start the meeting once the scholars have joined.
Okay, okay. No problem.
Good morning, ma'am.
Yeah, good morning, Praveen.
Yes, ma'am.
So, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. You are audible.
Okay, fine. I'm there.
Yes.
Yeah.
In 2 minutes we will start, ma'am. We are
Yeah,
waiting for
sure.
our principal.
I was just getting worried, because I'm using this WebEx after a very long time. We are so
Oh,
used to Google Meet. So, yeah, anyway, I've managed to enter.
yes, ma'am. No
Yeah.
problem.
Okay. Yeah.
Good morning, Yashashwini, ma'am. Yashashwini, ma'am, are you there? Yeah, I think.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good
Good
morning,
morning.
Praveen. Good morning.
Yeah. Yes.
I hope I'm audible.
ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ನಿಮ್ದು actually voice is so low actually. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What about now?
Yes, now it's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Come.
I'll just mute myself for now so that
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
there's no
Yes.
disturbance.
Oh, sorry, sir. Actually, we are waiting, sir. Space for you.
Good morning, Mr. Parveen. When we are going to start? Mr. Parveen, are you there?
Actually, we are waiting for one more scholar. Yes, sir.
Okay, so please make an announcement for the participants who are waiting. At what time you will be starting?
Sir, all the panelists have joined. We can start, sir.
Okay. Okay, then I will start. So a very good morning to all the dignitaries, participants. Today we are going to have a discussion on preserving history, the best practices of cultural heritage, disaster risk reduction. Yesterday we discussed about the environmental and human threats posing to the cultural heritage and how we can protect them from these threats. We had a very in-depth and intellect conversation on this particular topic of cultural heritage. Now today we will be focusing on the best practices for cultural heritage disaster risk reduction. First, I would like to thank the Executive Director of NIDM, Shri Rajendra Ratnu, IAS officer, who is the chairperson of this webinar, and the patrons, Professor Santosh Kumar and Inclusive Disaster Risk Reduction Division at NIDM, and Mr. Praveen Kumar, Head of Department of History, KLE Law College, Bangalore. KLE Law College is collaborating with us for this webinar and also for the yesterday's one. So today we will be having a few discussions on the impact of disaster on cultural heritage and their management by Dr. Arthi Deshpande Mukherjee, who is an assistant professor of archaeozoology and controller of examiner, Deccan College Postgraduate and Research Institute, Pune. And also on the topic of conservation and restoration of archaeological and historical sites by Ms. Yashaswini Sharma, architect, author, research, urban historian, founder, architect, etc. at Bengaluru. So I request Mr. Parveen Kumar to please give a little more briefing of this program and the detail how we will be discussing all these things and why it is important, why we are conducting this program today, how it will be beneficial for the participants, for the functionaries who are working in this field of the preservation and conservation of cultural heritage. Over to you, Mr. Praveen.
Thank you, Mr. Aidar. Welcome to everyone who are actually joined the session. Today we have two topics, very important, interesting topics. Impact of disaster on cultural heritage and their management, and conservation and restoration of archaeological and historical sites. So as we know that the natural disaster and human caused incidents have a very significant impact on cultural heritage sites and artifacts. So leading to the loss of valuable historical and cultural resources. So today in this webinar, we are trying to explore the impact of disaster on cultural heritage and effective strategies for management. So regarding this, we have two eminent scholars, Dr. Arthi Deshpande Mukherjee and Ms. Yashaswini Sharma. Arthi Deshpande Mukherjee, she is an assistant professor of archaeozoology and controller of examiner at Deccan College Postgraduate Pune. Madam, actually, she will discuss the impact of disaster on cultural heritage and their management. Madam is also will be share her expertise in the field and provide insights into effective strategies and plans for managing and mitigating the impact of disaster on cultural heritage. I hope the topic will be useful for understanding the management of cultural heritage. So we have one more scholar, Ms. Yashaswini Sharma, architect, author, researcher, urban historian, and founder of Architect at Bengaluru. Madam will be focusing on the conservation and restoration of archaeological and historical sites as well. And also, Madam will be going to discuss the latest trends and techniques in the conservation and restoration and provide insights into effective strategies for preserving and restoring cultural heritage sites and artifacts. So, on behalf of NIDM and RCCH and Heritage Club, so we would like to welcome you, ma'am, Arti ma'am, and Yashaswini madam for this session. So we hope that this webinar will be providing valuable insights and practical guidance for professionals and individuals, those who are actually involved in preserving cultural heritage as well. So I hope it will be a wonderful session for the day. So that's why I appeal to join us to learn more about the impact of disaster on cultural heritage and the effective management and conservation of archaeological and historical sites. Thank you very much. Now I'll over to one of the coordinator, Ms. Meghana Mandapati, to continue the session. Once again, I welcome you all the delegates as well as panelists and our eminent scholars on this session. Thank you very much.
Good morning, one and all present here. It gives me immense pleasure to Dr. Happy Deshpande ma'am. Ma'am holds the qualification of BSc, MA, PhD and has 16 years of teaching experience. Ma'am has a research specialization in archaeozoology, archaeomycology with an experience of 23 years. Ma'am has directed and co-directed many research subjects and has given lectures across the world. Ma'am has also written many articles. Now, I would like to introduce another eminent speaker, that is Mr. Yashaswini Sharma, architect, author, researcher, urban historian, founder, architect of Aesthetic Architects, Bangalore, practicing researcher educator, who has MA in architectural research from Cartwell University, UK. Ma'am has also published a book that Bangalore, the Early City, AD 1537 to 1799. Ma'am's practice includes architectural, heritage, and interior projects. The design solutions have emerged as response to requirements and each project, keeping the vision of client while maintaining reforms to commit sustainable practice. Welcome, ma'am. I would also like to welcome our IPSC coordinator, Mr. Manoj Kumar B. Hiremat, sir. Now I would like request Manoj sir to present the session. I request Manoj sir to come.
Nothing is audible at our side.
Sir will be
Your voice is not clear.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yes. Good morning, all. Thank you, Meghana. Thank you, organizers. Since today, Principal Dr. J. Mallikarjunaya is occupied in another national level event that is happening at Kelly Law College, Mumbai. So on his behalf, I am present in the meeting today. I will not take much of the time. I'm not an expert on the area. However, since the Kelly Law College with its Heritage Club has jointly organized this event, and which is a most important and very valuable webinar, because today's times are very volatile and where the culture is almost being forgotten. In such a scenario, uh, both all the three organizations who have come together and have organized this webinar in order to uh, inculcate that value among the citizenry as well as the all the students of Kelly Law College about the awareness and to protect the cultural heritage of India. See, usually in our regular theory classes, be it a constitutional law or any other uh, theory classes, we definitely emphasize on the rich cultural heritage of India, and we keep taking pride about it. But however, that should not be confined to the theory classes. That has to be culminated into reality or a practice, is what the aim and objective of the uh, Heritage Club of the KLE Society's Law College. So in that direction, I would like to express some of the views. Like when I being a constitutional law student, when we teach our students about the cultural heritage, especially as a part of constitutional law, while speaking about the minorities' rights to protect and preserve their language, culture, and their religion. So it's not that only minorities are given a right to protect their culture. Basically, this is a duty on the part of all the citizens to protect the cultural heritage of India. You can see that in Article 51A, Clause F, which is the fundamental duty of every citizen to safeguard and preserve the cultural heritage, especially the composite culture of the India. Indian society or the Indian history, if you look into, it is known for the composite culture. India has never been a monoculture. It has been always a multicultural society. So, with this multicultural society, there are so many historical monuments and heritages that are existing in India. They are all needs to be preserved and protected. That is the a collective duty of all the citizens, is what we usually learn in the classroom. But however, to put it in practice, like in KLE Law College in last 2 years, an experiment has started, that is outcome based education. Whatever we learn, there should be an outcome for it. So when we learn this about history or the cultural heritage, we shouldn't be just appreciating the richness of the cultural heritage of India. At the same time, we must be responding, or we must be actively involving in protecting this cultural heritage. So in that direction, what we are supposed to do, that discussion is happening at our college, and Mr. Praveen Kumar, who is head of the Heritage Club of the college, also the history teacher, has started this activity in a small scale, I can say, because recently we have visited some of the heritage sites and tried to clean them and restore them, no doubt, at a very small scale. So we can say, in Kannada we say no alilu seve. So we have started that, and we would like to take it to the next level and uh, be a little real contributors in the protection and preservation of the cultural heritage of India. So in this direction, maybe the webinars like this will definitely will add a lot of value and increase that urge among our students fraternity to preserve the cultural heritage of India. I guess with this brief remarks, I would like to put an end to my talk. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to address on this webinar. Thank you. Over to you, Meg.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your valuable insight. Now I request Dr. Aarti Deshpande Mukherjee ma'am to continue with this.
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, madam, you are.
Okay, a very good morning to all of you. And at the onset, I would like to thank the NID director and Mr. Praveen Kumar and many others who are involved in this, webinar, for giving me the invitation to participate here and to give this particular talk. So I can start by sharing my screen. screen? Excuse me, I'll need some help because how do I share the screen? Because on my, it is not allowing me to share.
Ma'am, then you
Okay, yeah, yeah. Okay, is it visible?
yes, ma'am.
Yes. So today I will be speaking on the impact of disasters on cultural heritage and their management. I'm not sure whether this is going to has already been told to the participants previously, or I'm really, if it has been, please kindly excuse me of my ignorance. And I just hope that I will be able to deliver this lecture and that it would be fruitful to all the young participants, and also hoping that in some way or the other they will be able to sort of take care of their whatever heritage we have around us, and sort of create a kind of consciousness amongst us to better preserve our past. So again here, what is heritage? And heritage is nothing but something of very intrinsic value. It could be a site, it could be a archaeological site like say Mohenjo-daro, or it could be a big monument or a building like your, the pyramids or many of the temples which are there, Qutub Minar, Taj Mahal, these are there. It could be also an area, a geographical area, where it has got some kind of very unique ecosystem. See something like the Amazon rainforest. Here in Western India, now even the Western Ghats are considered to be a part of the natural heritage. So basically, we have two types of heritage in the world now, which are classed as, you have cultural heritage, which are sort of man-made, and then you have sites which fall under natural heritage. So these are mostly having a lot of geographical value. They have very unique ecosystems. Some of your national parks come under this heritage list. So under this heritage sites or heritage studies, we see two types of basically heritage. That is, one is tangible and intangible. So what we know today is that across the world, there are such kind of heritage sites which really were created by human beings quite some time ago, and these today we can see them in some form or the other, because depending upon their preservation, they are still present alongside our urban settlements, alongside our contemporary, modern structures. And always people will ask, what is their value? Why do we need to preserve them? Or these are just old things, they don't have any value. But if you take a personal interest in such heritage, now for example, within your own homes, within your own house or within your own families, you will find that you will have some hometown, or you will have some village to which you belong to, and it is important to you because your origins are from there. Okay. And so you would try to, as much as possible, you would try to visit that area if you are staying somewhere very far off. Very often we find, a lot of people now who are settled in US, Europe, they try to go back to their roots because everybody is so concerned about from where we have come, what are our origins. And then they will try to, help the areas from where they might have grown up as a child, or where they were born, by building hospitals, building some kind of houses, building all kinds of schools and things like that. So they sort of try and contribute. So in a way, this is a part of your cultural heritage. And So heritage today is extremely important, whether people agree or disagree that it is to be preserved or not to be preserved. There are a lot of human rights issues also, where you find that heritage is given more preference sometimes, where people lose their land or property because there is some heritage monument which is there on their property, and that is given much more preference. Now, for example, if you go to places like in the Western world, especially America, Europe, you find that, if supposing if you have some monument or some archaeological site is discovered on your property, at once all kinds of construction is stopped, and more importance is given to that heritage. So there are a lot of these kind of issues also which are there. But to come to the point is that heritage is definitely very useful to all of us, because it is a memory of our past, and these are sort of legacies which are being handed down through generations, and which also need to be handed down to the next generations which are to come.
You're not audible.
Are doing so many programs which have been designed. There are scientific analysis which are being doing just to maintain and preserve our heritage. But what we are seeing is, which is very natural, that heritage sites being fairly old. There are sites which are more than 1 million years old, and then there are sites which may be just 100 years old, but they are always at risk both in time and space. There are, as I said, those sites which are 1 million old. We have sites which are there in Africa, where the earliest humans developed, and then they sort of moved out of Africa to other regions of, say, South Asia, Southeast Asia, or they went into Europe. Some 50, 60,000 years ago, they migrated. So these are also sites. But they are at risk because they also have to face the vagaries of nature. And in the present context, human development has become so fast in these, just after the, say, your industrial revolution, our growth, our development has become so extensive, very quick, because of which, you find humans everywhere. I mean, humans have even now are sitting in Antarctica also. We have so many stations placed in Antarctica. And maybe if the climate had been a little bit more fair, I'm sure Antarctica would have been also completely occupied. So because of this, when we have to make space for human beings to live, heritage sites often come in the way, and that is why they are at risk. Now, most of these sites you will see, or monuments, or even the objects which we get from our excavations, very often they may be made up of wood, bone, ivory, mostly organic material, as well as inorganic material. You also have stone objects, you have materials made up of shells, you have materials made up of all kinds of metals. And all these materials, mind you, they are subjected to changes. They will undergo some change. They are not, it is not a very static archaeological record, as we would say. They will be experiencing different kinds of changes, and depending upon their preservational conditions, they would either be well preserved, or they would be completely destroyed. So very often when we excavate, or when these things get exposed, it becomes the moral responsibility of any archaeologist or in a museum, that they need to be very well curated, and they need to be very well conserved, so that their preservation remains good, and that can be kept as objects for the later generations. So what we are seeing is that today, because of so much of human expansion, we are finding that there are many, many sites which are at risk. There's a whole list of sites which has been given by the UNESCO. You know, UNESCO is the one which sort of preserves, conserves. They come out with a lot of rules and regulations that how we maintain our heritage sites. They also are responsible for, it's a United Nations agency which is looking into these various natural heritage sites, cultural heritage sites, all kinds of tangible and intangible heritage. They help to develop programs for better preservation of these sites. Many of the archaeological sites are given importance as a World Heritage status, you know, just because of their very uniqueness, and because of which some of them, due to their antiquity, due to their whatever importance they had in the past, say for example the Taj Mahal. More recently, we have sites like Dholavira, which has also entered the record of the UNESCO for the World Heritage Sites. So because of which UNESCO is able to, you know, give funding for maintaining these sites. But at the same time, whatever it is, we find that many such sites are there which are undergoing a lot of, you know, they are at a risk, and some kind of management has to be done both at the local level, at the international level, just to preserve them. So here are some list of places which are requiring, which are at risk, and which require, and the list is sort of, you can say, endless, because if you look at sites which are all across the world, there would be so many. Now, these are some of the very popular sites in India which are also at risk. For example, we have Taj Mahal in Uttar Pradesh, a World Heritage Site. It is known for its beauty. It is got so much of it, attracts, I think, thousands of lakhs of tourists every year from across the world, and because of which it is also under a lot of pressure, due to pollution, due to the footfall of tourists, and so many other factors. It is also at a risk of slowly, you know, getting facing some kind of a slow destruction. Of course, we also have to consider in today's world, terrorism is quite a major, you know, destructive force for many of these sites. And as we have seen it happening at Bamiyan, in Afghanistan, where all those beautiful Buddha sculptures were completely bulldozed, or they were completely bombarded by the Taliban, and the world just could not do anything. It was such a helpless situation. So such kind of situations rise across everywhere, and so we have to be a bit more cautious. So then we have these sites like the Majuli Island in Assam, which is also slowly facing a lot of issues because of, you know, there are the Brahmaputra is always flooding its banks, so there are chances that sometime this island might be completely, you know, submerged. Then you have the Sundarbans in West Bengal, which are always ravaged by cyclones. Whenever there is a cyclone in the Bay of Bengal, the this whole the Sundarban area suffers a lot. The people face a lot of issues with, you know, they're slowly sort of drowning, and in fact, the Sundarbans, it is, they are mangroves, which are a very protective, you know, boundary which helps protect the West Bengal coast from all these kind of cyclones and things like that. But all kinds of, you know, even tsunamis or any kind of tidal waters, and you know, but in the Sundarbans, what is happening is a lot of tree cutting is going on because it is good firewood, and people are expanding. There's a lot of silt waste which is being thrown into the you know, Bay of Bengal, and Sundarbans are one of the places where all this thing comes and accumulates, and because of which the Sundarbans are facing a lot of risks. And you know, mangroves, they are a very unique kind of a ecosystem, and they sort of grow where there is both mixing up of your seawater as well as your fresh water. Now, if there is more of seawater and less of fresh water, those mangroves will suffer and then they will sink. And these mangroves are unique because they support a lot of wildlife. For example, the Royal Bengal tiger is found in the Sundarbans. So there are a lot of unique animals which are found there. The fisheries, which are there in the Bay of Bengal, many of the fish, they come into the Sundarbans to lay their eggs and then they go back into the sea. So these are a very, very important ecosystem for our coastline and as well as for the human settlements which are in this region. Then of course you have many of these other sites which are there which are under a risk. Now for example, a place like Ladakh, in recent years tourism has become so extensive in Ladakh region that everybody wants to visit Ladakh. I think in everybody, even I want to visit Ladakh. But what we don't realize is that by doing so much of footfall in these regions, we are actually causing a lot of damage to many of these places. So there are such sites all across India which are really today facing a lot of danger, both from natural disasters as well as from man-made disasters. Now, coming to the types of disasters, what we basically see is two agencies which are there. One is the natural and one is the man-made. So I will be speaking more on the natural. So before that, I will speak about the man-made one. Man-made, you could list a long list of, factors you could give for which act as disasters for your sites. The biggest, I think, would be war, where wars are destructive for not only for the people but also for such sites which are located in their regions where these wars happen. And today we know that if you take any place on the earth, wars have happened. They have happened even in India also. They are happening today in Ukraine, and then if you go whole of West Asia is forever at war. If you see places like Serbia, Bosnia, Ukraine, Syria, Iraq, Iran, these places have really been, even parts of Africa, where there's always continuous strife. There is a lot of political instability because of which wars happen. And in the bargain, of course, people are suffering in these areas. But at the same time, what we are seeing is that many of our archaeological sites and monuments are also, suffering because of the impacts of these wars. For example, when it happened in Iraq, Iraq has some of the very oldest archaeological sites, which civilizations, if you see, and they have got very good museums. And during the Iraq war, many of these places were bombarded. The antiquities were sort of looted because the museums just got exposed. Then if you look in places like Syria also, today we know that it forms a part of the old world, and it is in the old world, that is, your places of Asia, where we find that some of the earliest civilizations developed. And in a place like Syria, we have some very old sites. Syria, even for example, Turkey, where the earliest, you can say, animal domestication started some 10,000 years ago. Plant domestication started, agriculture started. So these areas are very rich in such kind of archaeological sites. And because of which, due to these frequent wars and strife, and what happens is during wars and such political instability, the economic conditions of these regions also suffer, and because of which they are really not, they are not able to take care of their human populations. So even taking care of heritage becomes a very big issue. And people do try to, international bodies do try to intervene and try to save things, but very often these things cannot be, what do you say, you cannot really help protect them, and then they get destroyed, as we had seen it at Bamiyan, and even in places like Iraq and Syria it has been observed. And of course you have other aspects like urban development. Today we cannot deny our human brothers and sisters, we cannot deny them any kind of urban development. You want good roads, you want good connectivity, you want good flyovers. But in the bargain, what happens is, and then you have agriculture also. You need agriculture because you need to feed the population. And in the bargain, what happens is many of these sites which are located in such areas, which are at such in such locations, they often are at a very, very high risk. They completely get, sort of removed from the surface of the earth. For example, we are seeing a lot of such destruction of sites in, say, in places like Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, where what we are calling them as Neolithic sites, these are the ash mound sites or even the megalithic sites. So in these places like Karnataka and your Andhra Pradesh or even Tamil Nadu, making way for big highways, agricultural land, they are completely removing these sites because they may not be like big buildings, or but whatever it is, if it even if it is a mound where we have found such antiquities, or these also get completely flattened out. And this is a very sad thing that we are seeing today in many parts of our country, where such heritage sites are being slowly lost to such development and thing. Then you have tourism practices where tourism is encouraged in places, and there is so much of footfall, as I would call, that it is in thousands people come to these places. Very often they behave very recklessly. They are jumping on monuments. You go to any of these sites, like if you go to, say, Hampi, or you go to Konark Temple, or you go to Qutub Minar, all these places, you will find that tourism is become such a big industry, and because of which sometimes these areas are under a lot of risk from such people who are very ignorant, people who do not care for heritage. They sort of sometimes even write on the monuments. They write graffiti. They do all kinds of practices. And you also have certain practices which are there, which people continue to do, and it is in some kind of a conflict, and then the heritage monument or a building, it suffers. I'll give you example of the Karla caves in Maharashtra. These are very beautiful carved caves which are there on the way between Mumbai to Pune. And these were built somewhere, I think, in the somewhere around, I think, the 1st century to the 5th century AD. And they were supposed to be the Buddhist caves from where the Buddhist monks used to travel to other, places like, say, places like Junnar, and they would carry out their thing, and then coming down to Ajanta and Ellora and these places in Aurangabad. So now Karla caves, what has happened is, at the entrance to the Karla caves, there is one Ekavira shrine. And this Ekavira shrine is a goddess, which is a much later goddess. I mean, she must be just 200-300 years old, the temple. And Karla caves are much, much older. They are more than around 2000 years old, whereas the Ekavira is much younger. And regularly during certain seasons, people, pilgrims come to this temple, mostly the Kori fishermen, Kori communities. They come to worship this Ekavira. And somehow government has not been able to do anything, because this is also something to do with human, our sentiments. And they have not been able to do any kind of stopping of these practices, because what is happening is the amount of people coming to those caves has become so much, and these are a little bit on a height, so they are very narrow staircases, and people come there, and it is like a more or less like a mela. I have also seen some time ago people have been cooking below these, in the around in and around the caves. You find people were cooking, And this was very, very shocking that, they had made chulas and they were making rice and food and things like that. So you see how vulnerable our heritage is, that we don't care for it and we do these practices. And many times, even organizations like the state archaeology departments or even the archaeological survey of department, they also cannot do much. And of course, when we talk of neglect, it is, there are sites which are really neglected, which do not come maybe into the category of World Heritage sites, and they may be fairly remote, and they seem to be just sitting, sort of ignored. These also need a lot of protection, conservation, and also they need to be attended to. And of course, then we have natural calamities, pollution. Pollution is another one big major factor. For example, for the Taj Mahal, there were a lot of tanning industries which are there close to the city of Agra, and these leave out a lot of poisonous fumes, and by which the Taj is slowly over the years it is getting spoiled because of this kind of pollution. And pollution, not only humans but even these sites will be at risk, because even a beautiful marble stone like Taj Mahal will get sort of tainted, it will change its color, and maybe in another 10-20 years it may even collapse, or there could be so many other things to it. And another very important reason, factor, would be also political instability. Any nation which is very politically unstable, for example, if you look at Africa, you hear of so many, there are all the time some coups happening, some president is thrown and overthrown, the junta takes over, the military takes over. So in such kind of places, leave alone people, even the heritage sites really have no importance, and very often they get neglected, they are completely destroyed. So now let us look at the natural disasters. Now, natural disasters, we have so many. And one thing is about natural disasters is that it is not in our hands. We cannot prevent very often natural disasters, say like fires, tsunamis, earthquakes, floods. These cannot be completely controlled by humans, and it is the fury of the nature which is very, very strong, and it can do anything anytime. But what we have to develop is, we have to develop better methods of countering such effects of such events which take place. And we know that in many places, some of these events, like for example, histories of earthquakes, history of flooding, history of tsunamis, is very much there. And that is why people need to take more and more, policies have to be framed in order to protect such sites. Now, coming to one of the most common natural disaster which many of our sites experience is fire. Fire can start because of so many reasons. It could be a very, very hot region where, because of too much of heat, somewhere some spark gets lit and the whole monument could be completely burned down. Or it could be because of short circuit also. Many of these monuments have got electrical connections put inside them, and maybe due to some kind of negligence, you will find that there could be a fire. And of course, fire has also been done in the past. We find that in many cultures, the more powerful cultures which used to dominate over the other cultures, they would try to control by setting fire to their settlements. This was a very, very common practice, because if you just completely burn down a settlement, then the people have no way of escaping, nor do they have any way of countering your power. So putting fire to settlements was a very common thing in the past, we see there are many places where such things have happened, and these have left their telltale damage on many of these monuments, many of the artifacts, which shows signs of charring and burning. Walls are burnt, we see burnt bricks and so many things. We also find that, as I was talking about, some certain cultures which were trying to predominate, and then they set fire to the settlements. For example, this is a picture I'm showing you of the site of Nalanda. Nalanda, I don't know how many of you are aware, but this is one of our oldest libraries, and it was set fire to by this Bakhtiyar Khilji, and the whole library was supposed to have been burned down with text, but of course some of these monument is still surviving. So these kind of setting fire in the past was one way of destroying some of this cultural heritage. And so what we see today are basically some remnants of what has remained. So you find that they not only do both direct and indirect damage, where the buildings get burnt, or sometimes even the things inside the buildings. Now, many of these monasteries used to get burnt, especially in Europe, when there was a lot of, during, I think, the what is the time period, somewhere during the medieval times, where the Christians, between Christianity and Mohammedanism, there was a lot of conflict going on. When those crusades were also going on, a lot of fire used to be set to many of the monasteries, many of the religious places. And in this, what happened was that they were also a storehouse for many manuscripts, which were completely burned down or remained partially burnt. And things like even smoke would have destroyed so many of these monuments. Water which might have been used to sort of put down the fires also would have helped to damage it even more further. So fire we find everywhere. Our archaeological properties are at risk, and recently also we had seen there's a very beautiful monument, that is the Notre Dame in Paris, which was also burnt. There was a sudden fire, and a lot of destruction happened, and this was in the modern times, in this particular century, but still they could not prevent that fire. So risk of fire is always there, and that is why people in museums, in such heritage sites, have to be very careful that no kind of such fire happens, or a short circuit happens. There are cases, where people, when they visit such sites, and if it is on a very dry, hot day, and if the grass is dry, people may be smoking a cigarette or a bidi, and they would just casually throw it, and then the whole thing goes up in smoke. And this has happened in some of our local sites, at least in Maharashtra. We have seen it happening, where somebody has left a bidi which has gone up into the temple, has been sort of partially burnt, or has been exposed to some the things of fire. Another very important disaster, which we really, in present times, it is really shaking us a lot. I mean, I think every 15 days we come to hear of some earthquake happening somewhere or the other. The most recent ones were in northern India. We face a lot of earthquakes. In the Himalayas, they are very much linked to earthquakes. Many of the regions, like places like Indonesia, then places like Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran, they also suffer a lot of earthquakes. And these are a very, one of the most major destructive forces of cultural heritage sites, because they cause such kind of damage. I mean, houses are broken down, they fall down during earthquakes. So what can one say about even heritage sites? Many temples. For example, when we were doing our explorations in the Beed area, that was in the early 2000, and from Deccan College, we were exploring along the banks of the river Godavari. And in some time, I think in 92 or 93, there was a very big earthquake which happened in Latur. And then when we were doing these explorations, we saw one or two temples where the things have been really sort of displaced. They have got a bit, the temple, walls have got a little bit distorted. And we felt that this must, and what the local people told us was that this was a remnant of the Latur earthquake. When the earthquake happened, it was a very, very bad earthquake. A lot of people lost their lives, houses were destroyed. So many of these heritage sites near Latur also might have been affected. And in these some of these temples, we did see such evidences for such destruction which happened. And you see, what happens is earthquakes are, because it is a force which is coming from below the earth, it can push up the ground, it can displace buildings. That is why many buildings fall down. So same thing can happen with our these heritage structures, which they are might have been made up of stone, but then also they do get displaced, and then they sort of fall down, or they are precariously balancing, and it needs maybe another bit of some kind of another natural disaster to get completely collapse. So there are some examples like this where you have this Basilica Cathedral in Peru where it also underwent a very, very bad earthquake. Then you have this province in China where this particular temple was also completely destroyed by the earthquake. And earthquakes are not only by themselves, but they induce so many other natural disasters. For example, tsunamis. When the 2006 tsunami came, it was such a bad tsunami, and then people started realizing that an earthquake which happened somewhere in the Indian Ocean was able to trigger off the tsunami, which came and did so much of destruction all across our east coast, and even parts of Indonesia and things like that. And not only tsunamis, they can also induce landslides, they fracture the ground. And so they may not be directly a very, very big threat, but these also are known to cause so much of damage, so much of, shifting of monuments, making them much more weaker, because you are sort of pushing up their foundation, so you are making them their base very weak. And once that base is very weak, these monuments are definitely going to slowly collapse one day. This is just to show you about the Nepal earthquake before and after. And this was also quite, I think, in the last 10 years, this earthquake had happened. And so here in Nepal, Nepal is again a very beautiful country. It is a small Hindu kingdom which is in the Western Himalayas. And here you have these very, very beautiful monuments which are something like this. This is a place called Bhaktapur, where you have these beautiful pagoda-like Hindu temples, and which are made up of wood and also a little bit of stone. And this is a sort of quite a heritage site it is. But when the earthquake came, it was so bad that a lot of property in this region was completely destroyed. And I had the chance to see it in the 90s, and now many things are sort of broken. And this was really very sad, because this area, as I said, these are some very, very beautiful temples. And the location again of Nepal is also very precarious, because it is located in the Himalayas. And Himalayas, as we all know, these are very weak mountains, very, very prone to high seismic activity. And I think every time there is a small spells of earthquake, the things shake. And but just imagine that these withstood for, I think, the last 500-600 years. These temples were able to withstand any kind of damage, but in the last few years they have undergone so much of damage. So such kind of earthquakes and their damage, and most recently we are seeing even at Turkey. Turkey is also another very important part of the world, where we find it is also known as Anatolia. where we had the earliest evidences of plant domestication, animal domestication. There are large number of sites which are located there. Some of our very early Neolithic sites are located in this region. And because of the Turkey earthquake, many of these sites are damaged and people are still trying to recover. And what happens is when such calamities take place, say archaeologists or any kind of researchers who are actually studying these regions, the research also gets affected because your access to these places becomes very difficult. And what happens is then the research also comes to a halt, and then this becomes it forms some kind of a gap in the knowledge which we are trying to obtain and to sort of extend. So these things are a sort of a triggering factor that an earthquake happens, and then there are so many other things which follow after that, which make our heritage sites at so much of risk. So there was the heritage site of Luxor, Egypt. All of us know, because famous for its important pyramids. But in 1992, there was such a massive earthquake where so many monuments were destroyed in Egypt, and they were sort of, people did later on, now they have tried to reconstruct, bring them up and rebuilt many of them. And here also you have this temple of Philae, this particular site of Luxor, where so many beautiful monuments were located there. So we do not know to what extent the earthquake weakened the structures is not known. But at Khombe, the earthquake ground motions were so severe so as to dislodge and drop it to the ground, the large blocks. If you look at the pyramids, they are made up of these huge blocks. And see, not all earthquakes are depends upon their scale, right? So if a earthquake is for more shallow kind, much more milder kind, it is not going to displace a lot of things. There will be a little bit of shaking, and generally it just lasts for maybe a minute or two. Those who have experienced earthquake, I have experienced some very bad earthquakes, so you will find it shakes for some time. But in certain case, when it is on a very high richer scale, as it is known as, the whole ground could be pushed up, because it is something which is happening below the earth. And because of which, this is what happened at these Egyptian pyramids, that those large blocks which were there, they were completely being pushed up, they were sort of thrown around, and they were displaced. And now people have tried to again rebuild many of these things, and through slowly, people do try to conserve in that way by again reinforcing them, so that more damage is not done, because you cannot leave that structure just like that. You need to rebuild it so that it still retains its whatever intrinsic value, as well as to prevent it from getting further damage. We also see such adverse impacts of earthquakes in other disasters and other disasters on sites in Greece. Now, Greece is also one important region where we have a lot of these classical period sites, datable more than 2000 years old. They have these beautiful Greek palaces, their mausoleums, their frescoes, and the murals which they used to make on their walls, the Greek baths and things like that. So all these have also been at a risk because of the kind of frequent earthquakes which this region has been experiencing. For example, at Olympia, which is considered to be the birthplace of the Olympic Games, where they found that inspection of the columns and collapsed buildings indicates a constant directional pattern of structural failures, which are consistent with seismic faulting of past earthquakes. So this region, many of these regions, they have a history of earthquakes. It is not that suddenly in Greece there was an earthquake sometime, but they have been having frequently earthquakes have been happened of various scales, and because of which, when they studied these monuments, they are finding that there are certain shifts in their architecture. You find that the stones get slowly displaced, and next time maybe it may not be a earthquake actually which may topple these monuments, but it might be even by themselves, because they have become so weak, their foundation has become so weak that they may just topple on their own. So a lot of care has to be taken of such monuments which are impacted by these earthquakes. Another very common, factor which we see in doing destruction to our archaeological sites or heritage sites, including, people, is floods. And we see buildings getting collapsed, we see it being washed away, and there is so much of soil erosion because if there are frequent floods. Now, for example, this time the Uttarakhand floods were very, very bad, and you do have some very old temples there which are, um, sort of quite susceptible to these floods and they do get washed away. Many of the settlements also were sort of very highly troubled by these floods which happen frequently. We see floods happening in Orissa, we see floods happening in Bengal, we see floods happening in Assam, where the whole region gets flooded when the Brahmaputra river or any of those rivers are in spate, when they are in full, so what we are seeing is that, for example, a natural heritage site like Kaziranga, it is also a very important ecosystem where we have some of the most rarest of animals. I think you all know about Kaziranga. It is in Assam, and it has got animals like your elephants, rhinos, the wild buffalo, so many types of deer. And I don't know if it was this year or 2-3 years ago, we were reading about it in the paper, and it is now happening very frequently. And this again attributed to climate change, where these regions are getting completely flooded during the monsoon time, and many of these animals, they sort of perish because of the flood waters, because they do like, these animals which are living in Kaziranga, they do like to stay in a good, you can say, a swampy kind of a habitat where there is good amount of water, but flood waters can be so destructive that everything would be washed away. Excuse me. Damage to objects. Flooding, when floods recede, they cause a lot of damage to objects because the water remains, everything in the water doesn't completely flow away. It tends to remain, it disturbs the objects, it shifts monuments also, that you'll find something which was here, it gets shifted there. And water retention remains, it causes moisture content to increase, because of which there will be dampness, the walls could get affected because many of them would be sort of made up of bricks or some kind of plaster is on them. You will start seeing plaster, something what happens even in our houses also, with too much frequent rain and there is water seepage. You will find that our house walls also suffer. And so you can imagine about such heritage monuments where, if there is constant seepage because of high rainfall and things like that, you will find. And it also alters the landscape. Floods, when they go and when the waters recede, they would have tried to alter the landscape. Things get shifted, monuments would be shifted, they would sort of get, flown away. The whole sort of ecosystem also gets sort of rearranged when a flood passes through an region. And this is what causes a lot of damage in many of these areas where such heritage sites are located. And of course, inundation of sites. There are sites which remain submerged for a very long period of time if the flood waters don't recede. This time in Mohenjo-daro, in Pakistan had, I think, seen one of the century's most horrible, floods. And Mohenjo-daro, such a important site of the Indus Valley civilization, was subjected to a lot of floods. and the amount of damage which might have been done to the site, we really have no information now that much, because uh, getting some information from some of these areas is because of political unrest. It is not, information doesn't come so easily. So we really don't know what is happening at Mohenjo-daro now, how the condition of those, all their whatever, architecture or the structures which are there at Mohenjo-daro, because it is more than a 5,000-year-old site, and how much of damage it must have faced because of the flood. Some assessment has been done, I think, by UNESCO and some other their local organizations also. Here I'm just showing you, indirectly also, many, when we build dams and we cause, some of the backwaters, they form when a dam is built. And now where does the backwaters go? The backwater goes and occupies an area where there might be some habitation. And in this habitation, you will also find that there might be some old structures which are there. And obviously, they also sort of get flooded. And for example, again, when we were doing our explorations along this, in this bead region of Maharashtra, where the river Godavari, so the river Godavari also, a lot of damming has been done, a lot of backwaters have been created, and because of which, people had to literally abandon, they had to be displaced, because their whole area was coming under floods, under the backwaters. So people had to be moved. But when we visited these areas where today not much of, it was a very dry time of the year, so we could see this. We can still see some of the houses which are there, and in these areas you find that some of the temple structures are still standing, but slowly they do get flooded during the monsoon time, and this happens every year. And unfortunately, everybody cannot protect everything. So many of these structures are actually languishing. So there is this Parasdev temple which was immersed due to the Ujni Dam in Maharashtra, and most of the year round you will find that it remains submerged. At certain times it is so much submerged that even the shikhar also, there is water. So there are many such sites which are there, which have been exposed. Sometimes they are exposed, sometimes they are completely covered. So this is about volcanic eruptions. Now, volcanic eruptions don't happen everywhere and anywhere, but there are parts of our earth where regions have been experiencing volcanic eruptions. For example, Indonesia. Then you find that the most famous one is of the Pompeii in Italy, which covered the Vesuvius. This is the Mount Vesuvius, that it erupted and it covered this entire city of Pompeii with its volcanic ash, and people were just buried. Everything, life just came to a standstill because of the spewing out of the lava from this particular volcanic eruption, and everything got covered. The whole town or city got completely paralyzed, or it came to a complete halt. All people died. And so archaeologists have been excavating in these areas just to find out that what were the people doing at that time. And the archaeological research programs which have been are so well designed for studying these Pompeii ruins, that they've been able to tell that what the people were eating just before they died, and what were they growing, what activities they were doing. Because people, when they were covered with the ash, and obviously the ash, it is when there's such a large eruption, it not only spews out ash, there is molten lava which also comes out, there are mud flows which come out, and these are quite having very high temperatures, and everything can get burnt in their path. So same thing has happened at Pompeii also. Many of the skeletons were completely charred, and even they have found that the skulls of human beings which came under this volcanic lava, the heat was so strong that the skulls burst, because the brains, they must have been so heated that the skulls burst. So such kind of indications have been now revealed through these excavations at Pompeii. Beautiful murals, frescoes have been exposed, that and they've been able to reconstruct that how the city was, how it was living, and it was such a flourishing city in doing too many activities like arts, craft. There were discussions of politics, and so much of vibrant, you can say, activities were being conducted at Pompeii just before the volcanic eruption took place. And unfortunately, because of that, everything got covered up. And then today, through excavations, we are able to show that how it was before the eruption took place. Now, the volcanic eruptions everywhere, wherever they do, they really do a lot of damage. Today, we see even in Indonesia also that quite recently, some time ago, there was a volcanic eruption somewhere close to, I think, Aceh in northern Indonesia, where a lot of tourist people who were on the beaches, they were also affected by these eruptions. So volcanic eruption is one such activity which has brought about a lot of destruction. And even in the past, there have been cities like Atlantis and many others which might have experienced such kind of eruptions and were completely destroyed by such very, very violent natural. It's a very, very violent natural disaster, because it causes so much of burning, heating, melting, and nothing will remain in its path. There's complete, total destruction. Then, of course, we have some other very important agencies also, like avalanches. And avalanches happen in mostly the places like the Himalayas, in Switzerland, in the Swiss Alps, and where avalanches are nothing but where, because of some kind of, maybe some kind of tremors or some kind of earthquakes, the whole sheets of ice or snow comes crashing down, and because of which uh, places get completely covered with such avalanches. Whatever comes in its way, people get completely buried, and even many of the sites also would be completely destroyed by such kind of avalanches which happen, say, in the Swiss Alps. Along with avalanches, we also see a lot of mudslides. Mudslides are triggered off by your earthquakes, and whole villages can be completely wiped off, as what we saw even in Maharashtra a few years ago, that a whole coastal whole village got completely, the mudslide started somewhere in the night, and by morning the whole, more or less, the whole village was destroyed. So here also we see. And of course, we have the famous tsunamis did a lot of destructions. As we know, it has been continuously, tsunamis have been coming to the coast of Japan, where they destroy a lot of things which come in the way. The very famous tsunami at Sendai in Japan. Then of course we have tsunamis which destroyed so much of our properties in our southeastern coast. Here, this is what happened in Sri Lanka at the time when the 2006, I think, tsunami came, and the whole temple complex was completely sort of destroyed. Now, tsunamis have also known to, what we have seen on our, say, on the Tamil Nadu coast, some of the temples came to be exposed because of the wave action. They also help to bring out some of these monuments which have got covered up with sand with time, because of wind action. Many of these, on the coastal areas, if there is too much of sand, these things get buried in that. But because of the tsunami, it also helped to bring out some of these things, because the wave which came, it sort of washed away the sand from those monuments, and it helped to expose. Then some of the tsunami, it must have also affected places like Mahabalipuram and some of the coastal monuments which are there. And this is one factor which is not completely destructive at this moment. We are not seeing the immediate impacts of the sea level rise or the coastal change which bring about coastal changes. These are sea level rises are happening because of the warming of the global warming. the sea levels are rising, our polar caps are slowly melting because of the sea levels rise, and it is predicted that many of these islands, like say Maldives or even places like Bangladesh, Calcutta, they would be under water in another, few centuries or so. So sea level rise, though it is not an immediate factor, but it is slowly causing a lot of damage also, and many of these monuments would be at a risk. Maybe our shore temple like Mahabalipuram and all would get completely submerged. So the need to protect cultural heritage sites from natural and man-made disasters. So what we have to really, these things have to be seriously thought about. And of course, people have been now thinking, especially with the UNESCO, which is supposed to be a guardian for looking after our cultural and natural heritage. And they come up with a lot of programs, with a lot of, laws, by which they are trying to protect these heritage properties all across the world. A lot of things are being implemented. They provide funding, and they also give them some kind of a status by which they acquire much more funding, because they've been able to identify that certain monuments or certain heritage properties are at much risk than the others. So they do this kind of assessment is regularly being done, by which they are able to, people then can focus on more, uh, you know, uh, heritage sites which require much more attention as compared to maybe some other ones. So this is not only the UNESCO's duty to do this, or the UN, but all countries are involved in this. Wherever they have their heritage properties, the government has to be very active in coming out with such programs. Not only the government, we also want that all citizens, it is our moral responsibility to safeguard cultural heritage property, whether it is in your village, it is in your town, or it is in your city. In some way or the other, one should contribute by looking after this property. If you can maintain it in some ways, there are many organizations, there are many NGOs which are doing this. You have even organizations like Intact, which is, looking into many of these aspects. Now, for example, it's really nice to know that Praveen, he's actually my student, who's doing his PhD, and he has taken this initiative of having this club in his university to start such programs which will sort of get people to get involved. Scientists as citizens have the moral responsibility to raise the consciousness of governments to prevent armed conflicts from damaging cultural heritage sites. Now, scientists, they cannot be just doing their research in isolations. Very often we have to be involved with the citizens as well as the governments. They should be able to motivate the government to prevent any such kind of armed conflicts which are happening in areas where there is political strife, so that such things cannot be damaged. Scientists also have to prepare programs or carry out research which will also help in protecting these cultural properties. That some new research or some way, where you can think of how you can conserve, say, some kind of metal coins or some metal objects. So some new research has to be developed by scientists in conserving, including even architects have to be involved in this, where they would advise the government as to how to better take care of these monuments. Policies should be made by government, so that you can which can be followed by the even the common people. They should be implemented properly and on time. There's no point in implementing a policy that you start planning today and then it gets implemented after 10 years. That is not going to be. Policies have to be made very well, and implementation should be fast, because these sites cannot be waiting for everybody to protect them, and they would sort of at the same time, at the international level also, there have to be a lot of treaties where the governments come together in order to protect these monuments. So concerted scientific and engineering efforts must be made to assess the present state of cultural heritage sites, their vulnerability, they're seeing of natural man-made hazards and the feasibility of reducing future damages of destructions. So efforts should be also made that to see sites, you do your assessment and try to give some kind of what do you say, feedback on that what you can do to protect it so that it doesn't get harmed even further. So as much as possible you try to reduce these kind of damages. So if, for example, if a cultural heritage site is found to be located near a seismically active fault, so you call in, say, geologists, or you call such kind of experts, or even you can call for example, now we have this NDRF and all these organizations. They should be called in to give their input as to how best the cultural property could be preserved. Now, certain man-made disasters such as chemical spills or accidents, they can be also prevented, because chemical spills or oil spills, which happen even in the oceans, are also extremely destructive. So the laws have to be much more stringent, that industries should be stopped from doing such kind of activities. Many of these activities are illegal. A lot of industries, they put a lot of their effluents into the water, and there has to be such kind of check. Public awareness, community-based support, and government sponsorship to protect cultural heritage can be achieved through educational programs. So start educational programs for all, I think for all age groups it should be done. There are a lot of people who would be interested, even the old people also. They can be also, roped in to give their advice, to make them aware, so that they can even tell it to their children, their grandchildren, the next generation also be prepared. At school levels also, we have to start implementing these kind of programs, so that the younger generation is very much made aware of what their heritage is and how best they could be looking after it. And of course, scientific research, especially all your this Department of Science and Technology should have programs or research programs where they will be looking at ways to protect and conserve our heritage thing. International efforts must continue and put emphasis on scientific programs, engineering capabilities, and in the national and international response to economic needs to protect the heritage sites. So I have tried to give you as much as I could in this time, and I hope I've been able to convey the meaning, and that how important our heritage is, and that how best through our little efforts also how we can try to conserve it and protect it. So thank you. I want to offer my acknowledgements to Sri Rajendra Ratnu, IS Executive Director and NIDM, then the National Institute of Disaster Management, and Mr. Praveen Kumar, and all the team for organizing this webinar, and also to all the participants for their patient hearing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The loss of cultural heritage can have significant economic, social, cultural impact, as well as affecting the sense of identity and cultural heritage of affected communities. Ma'am brought into light how urbanization has led to the destruction of heritage sites. Ma'am also informed us about how tourist practices and natural disasters has spoiled our heritage. We as citizens of this country should take practices and take responsibility to protect our heritage sites. Thank you, ma'am. Now we shall continue with the question session. Please drop your questions in the chat box. I request, ma'am, that there is a question from Nabruna Vora. How can local communities be involved in the preservation of cultural heritage sites?
Local communities. Yes, local communities, I think one has to take initiative. Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, at local levels, you can take initiative even in your locality, in your village, in your town, in your city, in your village, or even in the place where you're staying also. You can sort of get together a group of like-minded people, or if it is your university or your college or your school, try to make some such kind of groups which can have some kind of lectures. They can visit these sites, get people to also be involved in visiting these sites and then informing them about its importance. So a lot of initiative one has to take on one's own if you really are very concerned about heritage. And it is not only just about hearing lectures and wanting to visit, but I think at some level or the other people should get involved. We cannot say that I am not an archaeologist, or I am not an architect, or I am not a scientist, so I don't think I need to get involved. It is not like that. I think everybody in their own way can contribute. Even a small school child can also contribute somewhere for preservation of heritage. And even a say a housewife also, even if she is at home also, she should be able to contribute. So try as much as possible through your own ways to preserve heritage. And we are seeing today, there is a lot of development happening so fast that we are not able to keep up with these developmental activities. We cannot stop it completely, but somewhere or the other, voice your opinion and try as much as possible. And certain places where you feel that things are really wrong and the heritage is at a risk, you can contact bodies, like you can contact the Archaeological Survey of India. They are the doyens of our cultural properties. You can contact them and get them interested. If they may be aware or not aware of that property in your area, but in some way or the other they could come and help. So I think personally at all levels people should get involved, and it is not that it is left to only a certain category of people who are going to look after our heritage.
Thank you, ma'am. The sub-question: how can digital preservation be utilized to document and protect cultural heritage sites?
Can you repeat it once? I was reading another
How-
question.
How can digital preservation be utilized to document and protect cultural heritage sites?
How can, 1 minute, how to preserve,
Digital preservation.
how to prevent?
No, ma'am. Digital preservation of documents and how can they be used to protect heritage sites?
I'm not getting your question. I'm just trying to see it in the chat box. Is it there? 1 minute. Okay. How can local communities be involved in the preservation of culture? How can digital preservation be utilized to document and protect cultural heritage sites? Yes, digital preservation, now we are getting digital. So this, of course, not everybody can do it, but there are organizations, both NGOs as well as the Archaeological Survey of India, a lot of some of the university departments having archaeology or museology. They would be documenting such temples or monuments, and these things are going to remain. It's going to be remaining because they are in the digital format, so they are going to be quite well preserved. And this kind of digitization is very much required. And in fact, even the Archaeological Survey of India, they had a big project where they are documenting all kinds of antiquities which they find from archaeological sites. And so it will be a place where if one wants to see some particular, say, a statue or some object, you can contact them, and with permission you will be able to access it. So digitization of such things is very much required in today's world, because we certain things we are not really able to stop. For example, urban development where a temple could be completely shifted, or it has to be broken down to make way for another, some new structure. So such things are going to disappear from the landscape, and it is sometimes it's not possible to stop it. So digitizing such information and keeping it is going to be one of the best methods of preserving our, you can say, heritage.
Ma'am, we have one more question from Gilbert Charity and P. How much of importance does NEP 2020 give on this topic?
I really don't know, because I'm also
This is actually new policy which is going to.
Yes. I have really not gone through much of the NEP's this thing, and I just hope it is there because I'm sorry, I'm really not aware of what they are proposing in the NEP, whether it is there or not. We are still getting familiar with the NEP's policies. We are at the very, very basic level right now. So I really don't know.
Yes, there is a policy for protecting heritage and involving with the heritage protections as well. Some of the agencies are involving with that implementation. So let's see in the future.
Yeah. So I'm sorry about NEP. I really don't know whether they have any such special policies. I hope they have.
Yes, one question from Kumar Gupta. Do we have any study of impact of Gujarat earthquake and other major earthquakes in Himalayan region, Nepal earthquake or Gol, Kedarnath and Kedarnath shrine, etc., which might have dislodged the foundation structure to some extent. As you have any, as you mentioned, about the impact of tsunami. There is a question, ma'am.
See, not much that kind of a study has been done where they are, actually studying how much displacement must have taken, because even at this now the World Heritage Site of Dholavira also, it is located in Kutch, where the very famous Bhuj earthquake happened. And there are certain people have proposed that the earthquake has affected Dholavira also. Certain things have got shifted, but no detailed study has been done. Some amount of assessment, definitely the Archaeological Survey of India must have done to not only Dholavira and its other monuments in Gujarat at that time, which is like, place like Rani Ki Vav. When the Bhuj earthquake happened, a lot of damage must have happened. But these mostly remain in reports, so we as common people very often do not have access to such kind of reports. And I'm sure that the ASI must have taken some consensus of these monuments and how they might have been affected by the Bhuj earthquake. And that way in Gujarat, they have been quite active. About the Himalayan part, I really don't know how many sites have got destroyed, because they do have a lot of small shrines are there, but I really don't know, because nothing like this has been published, or but somebody could start as a research. Would be a new path of research to undertake. Some archaeologist or a historian also could get into this and just see the amount of damage done to such properties.
Thank you, ma'am. There is a question. Somebody asked, is there any available book available in this type of topic?
There are a few papers which are available for some like case studies from across the world, but at least I am not aware of any one common book where you could get everything. Today, of course, your Google gives you a lot of information. There are so many, like you open even the UNESCO site, you will get many examples. Across the world also, there are so many, sites which are reported, which have been impacted by these disasters. So these are all cases here and there. And there are some papers which have been published, but as a such about the book, I'm not aware of.
Yes. Recently, there is a editorial book, Heritage Conservation in Post-Colonial India, Approaches and Challenges. I think we were actually asked that question. Can go through this. It's available in Apeja. So edited by Manish Chalana and Ashima Krishna. It's a wonderful recent published book. So they can refer this book.
Yeah, it's good. You can ask them to refer.
Is there any question from our students audience? We have a student in law college going to be asking question.
Ma'am, how to conserve and preserve the natural heritage site from human interference?
How to preserve it?
conserve the natural heritage site from the human interference?
Yeah, so this is a very common problem, and it also becomes a human rights problem because we cannot turn man against animal or an animal against humans, and this is becoming such a frequent thing where we find many of these animals are encroaching into human settlements because we have sort of trespassed into their settlements, and this will happen. I mean, even in Kaziranga also they have seen in other sanctuaries also. It is a very frequently thing where people go for grazing. They also try to grow some kind of some crops and things like that, and by which they are trespassing into these natural heritage properties, and unless they are really carefully well cordoned off, you know if they are not well protected also, there is going to be a lot of human interference, and which will cause damage to both, not only the people who are encroaching, but even the people who are the animals who are living there, or even the flora and fauna in that region gets completely affected. So human interference, I think, unless the government makes very, very strict laws and regulations of such properties. For example, in America, they have all those big parks like Yellow National Stone, that park, or so there is a lot of strictness involved where people are also not allowed to go anytime and every time. For example, here in Maharashtra, we have, which I'm very happy about, is we have something called as a Khas Plateau. It's here in the district of Satara. It is on a sort of a tableland and part of the Western Ghats, where during the September month you find beautiful flowers. These are all wild flowers. And now it has come to the notice of many people, and it is becoming like a tourist destination. But what the people have done is that they have seen to it, that it is all very well regulated. Anybody and everybody cannot approach those places. You have to go through some kind of agency to actually access those parts. So in a way, we are able to keep this kind of human interference, tourism on a check. So such kind of places, if they are really truly cordoned off by the government, then only they will remain protected. Otherwise, everywhere there is human interference. We try to, I mean, Antarctica also, slowly, if people are able to live and the conditions are very good, they will start going to Antarctica. So human interference is something is very difficult to control. And with technology, access to very good technology, people can go anywhere,
Yes. Thank you. I can take one more last question from Bora. Can you provide examples of successful risk reduction efforts for cultural heritage sites in India?
I could not get the question. The thing is, I stay near an airport, and these
Yes,
planes.
it's okay. Can you provide examples of successful risk reduction efforts for cultural heritage sites in India?
Can you provide?
Examples. He is asking examples of successful risk reduction efforts for cultural heritage sites in India. Is there any examples?
So yeah, one place is, of course, definitely Taj Mahal. They are all efforts are going firstly because it has become a World Heritage Site. The thing then even in Ajanta Ellora, these are all World Heritage Sites, though they get much more attention, obviously. And so all kinds of they are taking measures to protect them and to see as much, because Ajanta, you have those beautiful paintings inside, so all care is taken that moisture, too much of light, all these things are done so that they are well protected. So there are many such monuments which are being cared for in the country. But the thing is, uh, our country is very big and our heritage list is very, very vast. I think you go to any village or any town, there will be so many heritage sites, and it does sometimes become very difficult to look after everybody, everything and everywhere. Lot of money has to be seen. So that is why at the local level people should start off, because the UNESCO is not going to protect your temple in your village or So at a local level, people can make efforts to do some kind of conservation, protection, you know.
Thank
And
you.
risk management, as I said, from such natural disasters like an earthquake. Earthquakes are more frequent and things. So in those places like Turkey, and there, of course, they must be doing a lot of assessment of these monuments, especially in Greece, you know, because it is so frequent. It's very, very common. So all kinds of steps people might be taking there.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah.
Now I would request Dr. Ms. Yashaswini Sharma, ma'am, to continue with it.
Hello. Good afternoon, all. I hope everybody can hear me.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Yes, we can.
Meghna, I need a little help to share the presentation because I cannot share content at the moment.
Ma'am, there's the option of share content. Next to this.
Yeah, I'm pressing it, but it is disabled. Next to that, is it? No.
Ma'am, I request Aarti ma'am to stop the screen share. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's on now. Is everyone able to see the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
May I know if everyone is able to see the screen?
It
No,
is
ma'am.
blank. Your share, but it is blank.
It is still loading, ma'am. It will take some time, I think.
Okay. Good afternoon, all. Thank
Now
you,
it's visible, ma'am.
NIDM.
It's good.
Is it visible now?
Yes, ma'am, it is visible now.
Well, a very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you, NIDM, RCCH, and KLE institutions for inviting me as a panelist to this very interesting conference on cultural heritage sites and conservation of same. In the opening remarks, Professor Hiremat mentioned that it is one of the fundamental duties of an Indian citizen to, enshrined in our constitution, to protect our heritage sites. In fact, I would like to add that it was part of a recent judgment by Justice Chauhan in the Iram Manzil case. And he quoted the same clause to say that Iram Manzil should be preserved. So it was nice to hear Professor Hiremat refer to that. We have heard Professor Mukherjee, who has spoken eloquently about the factors and threats that cultural heritage sites face. Now, what I'm going to do is take off from there and talk about how to remedy these and mitigate these risks, how to conserve and preserve heritage sites. I'm going to give some practical examples, both of them in Bangalore, because my practice is rooted in Bangalore and I run a practice called Aesthetic Architects. So we are focused very much on Indian temple architecture and heritage conservation. One of the examples that I would like to talk about is a restoration project that we are involved in Malleshwaram. This used to be the house of former Diwan, H.V. Nanjundaya. He was also the founder of Kannada Sahitya Parishad. He was the founder VC of Mysore University. He was also a judge of the Mysore court, many accomplishments to his name. So what this man did was he gifted his bungalow to the government to be run as a girls' school. So there is a vast property attached to this bungalow, which is now with the government. And the building itself served as a school for many years. But now, since the requirement is huge, The school has spread across the campus, whereas this particular bungalow was being used as an office and now is under restoration, and the proposal is to use it, adaptive reuse it as a museum for Malleshwaram. It is an initiative by the MLA of the region, Dr. Ashwath Narayan, and also the BBMP, which is the owner of the property. Now, when it comes to conservation, one of the first things that you do, which Professor Mukherjee also referred to in her lecture, is to thoroughly document the site. So what we do is we go reverse and we do a study of the site completely. The building as it is, including the cracks, the size of the cracks, the damages, where the seepage is, where vegetation enters, etc. And we do something called as a condition mapping. There is also a structural analysis done, and a plan is prepared on how to best save the heritage site. So then after doing all this, the restoration project process actually begins. Now there are many norms which govern this particular practice, some which come from UNESCO and ICOMOS. In India, we have CPWD, which gives its own recommendations. Then now in 2020, India passed something called as Zonal Regulations 2020, in which it gave exhaustive reference of how to conserve a site, and also proposed that there should be a heritage conservation committee in each district. Now, this is not implemented all across India. In Mysore, recent HCC was formed, but Bangalore still does not have a HCC. However, there was an attempt in the revised master plan 2031 to include such recommendations. Sadly, that did not pass the test because it was not prepared by a ULB. So the court has asked the authorities to redo the master plan. Now, we do have norms to go by as such, national and international norms, and we subscribe to that when we take up a conservation project. Now, the image that you see is of documentation of the building, where our interns and our architects are documenting each course, each condition, and including the substructure conditions before we start the project. Now, this is the bungalow in question, the HV Nanjundaya Heritage Bungalow, which is being restored. One of the things that we often face in an old building, in a historic building, is that we observe a lot of seepage, a lot of structural damage to the building. A lot of times this vegetation carries water and seeps into the wall and into the roofs. There is also a risk of groundwater rising through the walls, because most of the heritage buildings, they don't have something called as damp proof course, which is part of construction practices now, but the older buildings don't have it. So when as urbanization happens and as roads get relaid over and over again, oftentimes the ground level rises around the building. Now this leads to water seeping into the walls and rising through the walls, through the length and breadth of the building. Now in this image, one of the first things that we do is we undertake devegetation process. Now you can see some of the trees have got 10 feet, 15 feet long roots, which have grown right into the building. Sometimes we have to open up parts of the building and pull it out. Other times we dry it using organic solutions. If only organic solutions don't work, then we resort to chemicals. Most often we like to stick to organic solutions because they do least damage to the building. And in a process in restoration, we are always trying to restore the building to an original state without interference. So this building came up in 1915. It has traditional building practices. So we have to employ as close a practice as possible to restore it to its original state. Now, in both the slides, you can see how we have tried to remove roots that have grown into the building. Since the building had external stone wall, I would say that the roots weren't able to open it up completely. So that was lucky. But still, while removing it, we had to be very careful. When we remove vegetation as well and we open up a wall, we need to be mindful that we set the same stone back in place. So we have to do numbering and we have to be very careful of where each piece goes. Hello?
Sorry to interrupt, but the slide is completely not visible in the block.
Can't you see it?
No, ma'am. The second half of the slide is closed.
Can you see this?
No, ma'am. There's a patch in the.
Can you see this slide?
We can see a slide, but there's a small patch in conservation and restoration. That part has been hidden. All the.
Okay, I can see it very clearly, so I don't know what is happening.
Ma'am?
Do you want me to close it and reshare it?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'll just stop sharing. Are you able to see it now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So now here on this slide, on the right side, you see a photograph of a person looking at a computer. Now this is the Center for Earth Sciences in IISc. They were the ones who did the petrography of the stone that was used in the building that we are conserving. And they found that it belongs to closed pit belt. So whatever stone we ordered for restoration also came from the same belt. So we take a lot of care that we use the exact material which is present in the building and don't introduce any new material. So this is the building. Can you see this, Meghna?
Yes, madam.
Yeah, okay, good. So this is the slide of devegetation. I hope you can see this as well. So these are number of trees that we actually took off from the terrace and through the wall of the building. Some of it had grown right into the wall. Some of them were just on the slab surface, which we could dry out. But there were many which had put the root right through the wall. So we had to open up parts of the wall and remove it. The other part is where you have structural cracks. Now, there may be many factors why structural cracks are formed. Like in the earlier lecture, we came across natural disasters and other factors, even development which can cause cracks. But in this building, most of it were caused by vegetation. And this vegetation had led to separation of wall. And there were some instances where complete wall corners were separating and the building was slowly leaning away. So we had such issues. On the right hand side, you can see the structural cracks. And on the left hand side, you can see the damp which is spread right through the Madras terrace. There are large patches which are formed. Now the seepage is right through the slab. This slab had collapsed, and if you can observe carefully, you can see some eye sections which are holding up the slab temporarily. This particular slab had collapsed and it had fallen because the rafters also had given away. When water seepage happens, if the roof is built on wooden members, the water seeps right into the wood member. The wood member also begins to rot. Once the wood member begins to rot, then the slab starts failing. even the lime mortar also starts failing and losing its consistency, and structural cracks develop even across the roof. Now, in the other photo below, you can see of the courtyard, you can see that the fascia board, which should have been there to protect these timber members, has been removed through later intervention, and part of the parapet also had been replaced with concrete parapet. Now, cement concrete does not agree with lime concrete. They don't bond. So the joint will always, not completely bond, and there is a scope for water to enter through that joint as well. Plus, it adds additional load. Secondly, when they did this kind of a change in the parapet design, they seem to have removed the cornices which protect the wood members and also the fascia board. So both of these conditions led to the water seeping into the wooden members and failing the wooden members. So this led to reinforcement failing because wooden members are the reinforcement members for the slab, for the lime slab, the Madras terrace slab, which is cast upon it. And since seepage had also spread across the slab started sagging. Now, what do we do in such instance? Now, for structural structural cracks, we have a method called as stitching. We take stone lintels. Now here again, as I explained earlier, because the stone came from close-pated belt, we sourced the same stone and we formed smaller lintels across the cracked portion. So you place the lintel and make a joint over there and then redo the joint, apply lime mortar and plaster and fill in the air gaps using nozzles, and we push in lime slurry through the nozzle using an air pump so that there are no gaps in the mortar or in the plaster. Once we do this, we cover up the entire section. Now we don't remove lime plaster everywhere or lime mortar everywhere. Only where there's a fault, we do this work. Otherwise, we just, redo the paint where necessary. The intention is to retain as much original material as possible when you restore a historic building. Now here you can see that the terrace was also overloaded with reinforced cement concrete slab. When we replaced the timber members that had failed in the second floor slab, what we noticed was that the sag was not actually getting rectified. So then I suspected that there must be something that is wrong in the terrace. We could not see anything as such because there was a waterproof wash, which had been put all over the terrace. So because of my suspicion, we just did a patch test and then we found that there was a 4-inch RCC slab sitting on the Madras terrace, which had added considerable load on the entire terrace. So once we removed that, we found additional cracks in that slab. So in heritage restoration, documentation never stops. Sometimes you discover faults as you go along, and sometimes the costs also increase because of that. So we remove the entire RCC with hand, because in conservation practice, you do not use power drills and you do not use other mechanical equipments. You use your hand. It is done manually and it is done very, very carefully so that the vibration does not seep right into the original MTR slab or to the walls. The other portion on the left-hand side, what you see is our method of cleaning the existing tiles before we redid the roofs. Some of the sloping roofs had completely lost the Mangalore tiles. These had to be completely redone. But where they were already there, they were available, we prefer to clean them and we prefer to relay them. Now, this is the crack that we discovered below the RCC. And on the right hand side, what you see is the failed slab that I explained earlier. You can see that the wooden members are they have completely rotted away. And even the Madras terrace is not very stable. You can see the sag in the sections and the damp in the sections. Even the beam was affected in that particular portion. Now, the left-hand side, the terrace slab, which had the crack, we discovered only when we removed the RCC slab on top. So how do we conserve it? In some cases, we have to redo the entire slab. You can see that we are on the right-hand section, we have put the new wood members. Now, typically we should have used teak wood members itself, but it's a government project and the costs are limited, the budget is limited. So we went in for matti wood, which has a high retention, water retention, and it's very good in structural performance. Whereas when it came to openings, we used teak wood itself. Now, below this photograph, what you see is the casting of the Madras terrace. Now, upon these wooden members, you have two layers of brick which are cast, vertical and horizontal layers, on top of which the lime concrete is laid, on top of which the tiling is laid. Now, on the left-hand section, you see the material that we are using in our lime mortar. Of course, lime for the lime concrete slab. Then you have the surki. Now, we use organic additives like kadkai, which is called alalekai in Kannada. And we also use jaggery powder. Now, in season, you can use bilva. You can use other additives too. Brihat Samhita gives us about 15 ingredients. We have still not reached the stage where we can replicate that particular mortar from 6th century, but we have tried to, replicate the mortar that was used in this building 108 years ago. So this is, we never use water straight away. We use the water, the jaggery water, 50% and 50% of the katkai water to mix the lime mortar and even the lime plaster. Below this, you can see our worker demonstrating how the bricks are laid. So one is laid at 45 degrees and that is vertical, and the other one is on horizontal layer. Now, to do this, we don't have the earlier bricks that were manufactured, the small sections. So we cut modern bricks into 3 pieces and we use them. So here I have shown the phases of restoration of the roof and parapet. You can see the earlier section, how it was without the cornice and with the cement concrete parapet. And in the second phase, we had just laid the new MTR and we had begun the parapet work. And now we are nearing the completion. You can see the fascia board also has come up. The cornice has come up. The lime wash also is done. And the parapet has been completed. And in the earlier photograph, you can see sheet roof where tile roof used to be. That roof had completely paled and parts of it were even covered with tarpaulin sheet. So we replaced the entire thing because this is going to be used as an AV and an experiential center. We have insulation, which is least harmful below the sloping roof. So these are some of the details. When we are trying to do restoration and we find wooden members where half of it is rotten, but the other half is still usable, we try and do joints and you reuse them as a complete rafter so that no piece, no original piece is wasted. So this is our carpenter doing a joint which is got about dozen sections under key so that it doesn't fail. And normally this joint comes in 1/3 the rafter portion, not in the center section, because center section will fail. And when we use such a rafter, which has a joint, next to it, we put a new wooden rafter so that rafters with joints are not placed adjacent to one another. So there should be a gap of an original rafter or a new rafter which has no joint. That is our carpenter standing on the joint and demonstrating its strength. In this building, we had also Victorian etched glass, which was used, and they were rather beautiful. For this, we tried to replicate it. We sent it to a glass conservator in Bombay, and she was kind enough to replicate that. The only difference is that the glass panes that were used in this building are 2 mm thick. But since 2 mm thick glass is not manufactured anymore for window panes and not recommended, we had to use 3 mm. And the earlier method, the etching was produced by use of acid. And since it's considered unsafe now, we are using sandblasting technique to produce the same kind of finish. So during the course of conservation, the building also threw up some surprises to us. Initially, when we started, all the walls were white, whereas when we started slowly scraping the layers of wall, we found artwork, sill bands underneath. So now we have artists roped in as well to recreate these sill bands where they have been affected. So that is about the conservation of the HVN bungalow in Malleshwaram. I move on to another example, which is conserving city heritage on a pro bono basis. So my firm also runs something called as EA Samrakshane, which is a pro bono initiative. And we concentrate on preserving cities' heritage, and we lend a hand to other researchers who are working in this area. Recently, if you are a resident of Bangalore, you would have heard that recently an 8th century inscription was found in Hebbal. And earlier, this was part of 4 stones which were lying along a stormwater drain in Hebbal. Now, often what happens with old settlements, old villages and towns is that their defense structure, the fort, usually turns into a road. And often all the monuments or any placemaker which is placed becomes part of the road network and the stormwater drain. And that was the fate of these stones. In Epigraphia Karnataka, this particular stone was recorded only as a hero stone, because only the top portion of the stone was visible. Now, in 2017, there were road works which were taken up in Hebbal, and some of the residents felt that these stones may be endangered, and they contacted historian friends of mine who went there and dug out the stones overnight, only to find that this particular stone had an inscription below it. Now, this inscription became of significant importance because in the inscription, King Sri Purusha was mentioned. He is a Ganga king from 8th century. And the name of Hebbala is mentioned, which made Hebbala settlement the oldest settlement in Bangalore city. So this inscription was dated by one of the epigraphists, Dr. P.V. Krishnamurti, to about 750 CE. So that made it the oldest Kannada script available in Bangalore. And the other thing was it mentioned Perbollal Nadu Muvattu. So Perbollal Nadu is an old Kannada version of Hebbala itself, and it gave the designation, the administrative designation of a Nadu. Nadu was an administrative designation which was composed of several towns and villages. So this was an administrative center, is what the inscription tells us, and it gives us a number Muvattu, which is 30, that it was a center for 30 villages or towns, this particular place. And it gives us the name of the person, the governor, Pelnagatara, who was governing this particular province. Now, why was this inscription installed? It was to mark the martyrdom of a man called Kittaya, who repelled a Rashtrakuta attack on the place. So we have a lot more evidence coming in now. Kittaya becomes the first named citizen of Bangalore. So Dr. Aruni of Indian Council of Historical Research jokingly remarked that he's the first citizen of Bangalore. So that is the man holding the dagger, and he has spear stuck in him, and that is the Rashtrakuta army general who has struck him. But Kitaya is still continuing to fight. So this is the text of the inscription. Now, when this was found, a group called Inscription Stones of Bengaluru, which was founded by my friend Uday Kumar, they approached me to design a Ganga Mantapa in which all the 4 stones could be conserved, because it dates from that time. I proposed that it should be a Ganga Mantapa, and they agreed. And we thought that it should be conserved in the same place instead of moving it to a museum as is the normal practice. It was also the wish of the residents there. So to do this, when it came to designing a Ganga Mantapa, I realized that we do not have texts which, are particular to the Ganga style of architecture. So we took off to Manne, myself and my team, and we made a heritage documentation of all the artifacts that are, present in Manne. Manne used to be the capital of Gangas in the same period. So I thought it would be most relevant to take references from there. So once we did this, I also met scholar Dr. H.S. Gopal Rao over there, who requested for me to hand him the documentation, which will be published in his monograph, which is now been published and released. So we documented the entire Manne village, and we also had the ASI visit the place, and we showed them the monuments, and now it is under consideration of the Archaeological Survey of India, who want to give it a protected site status. So there are ripple effects happening of a single inscription being found in Bangalore. So then I designed the Ganga Mantapa, which would house all the 4 inscriptions. The size of the Mantapa was limited by the size available in that road corner. So it was limited, and we put the 2 inscriptions in middle and the 2 yantra stones on the side. Now I have used 2 types of pillars. Professor Adam Hardy, who is also my supervisor for my MPhil, he had a look over this design, and he suggested that, the rare columns could change, and we could bring in a little staggered pillar to change the language. So we did that, which also holds the support for the inscriptions. Now, to construct this, we decided that instead of going to the government, going to any agency for funds, we would appeal to the citizens of Bengaluru. And to do that, Udaya came up with this novel technique of digitally conserving the inscription. So the inscription was captured using a handheld digital scanner. And this scan was printed on brass replicas, and it was given to people who donated towards the construction of this mantapa. So each such brass replica with the information of the inscription and the discovery, etc., a pamphlet along with it was provided to each donor. And Bangaloreans from all over the world contributed. It took us a lot of effort. It took us a year-long effort to raise funds, to reach it to the right people. And this particular process also came under the attention of UNESCO's Unite for Heritage, who covered the entire process. And we were able to raise funds, and we were able to construct the mantapa. So to construct the mantapa, again, I called on my sculptors who are working on the Hoysala temple, which is coming up in Kolar. And they produced the pillars. We used granite here. And we also used lime mortar in the construction. So I had to call my conservation team, and they did the Adhisthana setting and other settings. The pillars once were all constructed in the sculptor's workshop and brought here so as to not cause too much disturbance to the neighborhood. Because when we tried to do the Adhisthana construction, because this is a road and it's a public space, there were quite some concerns about the dust and other pollution which was being generated. So we decided that we will construct everything, we will prepare in parts in the sculptor's workshop, and we will cart it here and set it in place. So this is the mantapa, this is the finished mantapa, which stands in Hebbala now at the very gate of Hebbala defense, which was there earlier. And all the 4 stones have been placed, and Kitaya has a new home. Now, this particular monument after conservation has become a sort of landmark with people who have donated, people who are curious visiting it. There was a person who came into the city from US, and the first place he went was, not his house, but he came straight to Hebbala to see the mantapa and then go back to his place. So it has created enough awareness among citizens of Bangalore. Of course, the people of Hebbala have never been so proud. They discovered that their neighborhood is the oldest in the city, and some of them have taken to naming the newborns as the surname with the surname Hebbala. So it is a win-win. And the place where this is constructed, earlier there used to be a lot of criminal activities being reported, a lot of drug dealings being reported, and chain snatching and pickpocketing and things like that. But after this mantapa has come up, there is a change in the entire atmosphere. The youth who were running about aimlessly, they have taken up to cleaning the mantapa and preserving the mantapa. Of course, we led a lot of awareness programs. We had a lot of talks which were given over here. The ASI essay, the previous essay, Shivkant Bajpayee and team also visited. Members of Mysore royal family have also visited the place, and you can see Udiya also over there. Mr. Kumaran, who heads the technical team of conservation, ASI, has also visited the place. And here are the people, PV Krishnamurthy and others, and Dilip Kshatriya, a localite from the area, who are standing proudly with the replica and near the mantapa. A lot of talks given to schools and colleges have raised awareness about this particular place and put it on the map of Bangalore, on the list of heritage sites to be visited when visiting the city. So thank you very much. I hope this has been a useful lecture. Thank you, NIDM, CCH, and KLE, a group of institutions. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Ma'am has talked about how they have been trying and putting efforts in restoring heritage sites and the challenges they face by doing so. Now we should take a question from the Q&A section. That is, which type of material is used in sculpture work?
In what work?
Sculpture.
I cannot.
Sculpture, ma'am, sculpture.
Fighter work. I don't know that actually.
Pewter work.
It's, I think, Jagdish Vekar, yeah, I think it's the plastering work or something like that, I think. So, which type?
Plastering work?
Plastering.
Plastering work, is it?
I think.
Yeah. So plastering work, basically, we use lime plaster in buildings constructed with lime plaster. Of course, it depends on what you're conserving. So if it is a temple, then they also use stone powder in the mix when they are putting 2 pieces together. And most of the time, the pieces are sitting by their own dead weight. So temple conservation is a slightly different aspect. But when it comes to buildings like these, we use lime plaster, and we use lime and sand. River sand is most preferable, but there is, of course, a ban on river sand. Sometimes for heritage sites, you are allowed to, take river sand, but now M sand is what is being preferred, being allowed by the government rather. And as I said, we don't use water directly. We use these water with organic additives, which give a lot more binding. And lime, as you know, strengthens over time. And the property of using lime mortar and lime plaster and this kind of construction is that it keeps the building naturally cool. The bungalow that we are restoring, the interior of the bungalow is 10 degrees cooler than the exterior. And it has great cross ventilation as well. So there are even health benefits to using organic additives. And which is why and India is the only country, which uses organic additives in its plaster.
Thank you, ma'am. I think no more questions. Ma'am, do you have any, do you find any sites in Bangalore, Southern Karnataka?
In Karnataka, there are lots of sites under risk. I mean, we used to have even prehistoric rock art in.
Okay.
To say something about it right now.
Oh, not audible, not audible.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, no.
Yeah, so the Dodkaneli rock ridge, which had the prehistoric art, is now lost because of urbanization. Thankfully, it was documented by somebody, and we have that particular paper at least which shows the rock art. Otherwise, in a city like Bangalore, it becomes very, very hard to secure anything because of the high value of real estate over here. Even the dolmens which were there, Almitra had documented it first, and dolmens in Jalhaldi, everything is under threat. Whether it is a fort, whether it is a palace, everything comes under threat. Heritage markets are under threat, because of real estate value, especially in cities. And sometimes I think we should have a policy like Italy, like in Rome. When you construct, you do an investigation and then construct, because often in places with habitation, we don't know what is underneath. And when we do big infrastructure projects which run tunnels underneath, we don't know what all you're pulverizing. So I think the more we investigate, the more we document, we will be able to conserve what is left. There are some beautiful temples in villages which are completely neglected. We have a lot of temples around Bangalore itself, which should be restored, whether it is Nallur, whether it is other places. Manne was an example that I gave. Manne was not under protection at all, Manne or Manyapura, until we documented. And H.S. Gopal Rao, I think he's been trying for 5 decades to get protection status for it. So everything comes down to the passion of the individual when you're trying to conserve something.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. Both our eminent speakers today have talked about the importance of conserving heritage sites, which cannot be overstated. These sites are often irreplaceable and provide important links to past, helping us understand and have shared a cultural heritage with them. They also play an important role in promoting tourism, education, and economic development in regions where they are located. However, conservation efforts can be challenging and require involvement of wide range of stakeholders, including government agencies, local communities, and organizations. I thank both of our eminent speakers for providing us with their knowledge. Now I would take this opportunity to extend my heartfelt thanks to Program Chairman Shri Rajendra Ratnau, IS Officer, Executive Director, NIDM. Thank you, sir. Our Program Director, Professor Santosh Kumar, Head of GIDRR, NIDM. Thank you, sir, for giving us this opportunity to collaborate with NIDM. It's been a great experience. I would also like to convey my beloved thanks to our principal, Sir Dr. J.M. Mallikarjunaiah, sir, in his absentia, and Dr. Manoj Kumar B. Hiremat, sir. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank Mr. Praveen Kumar K, Trustee Member, RCCH, HOD of Department History, KD Law College. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank Mr. Surinder, Secretary of RCCH. Thank you, sir. I would also like to thank our program coordinators, Mr. Vivek Sharma, Young Professional, NIDM, and Mr. Ali Haider, Junior Consultant, NIDM, for working hard for the past few days to make the webinar successful one. I would also like to thank the IT team of NIDM for their support and assistance. Last but not the least, I extend my gratitude to all the participants for participating in the webinar and being cooperative with us throughout the session. Before we leave the session, I request Manoj sir if he could conclude the session.
Good afternoon, all. Both the presentations I was able to hear. No doubt I was not on the screen, but I was keenly listening. And the second presentation, Madam was speaking about the restoration of the house of the famous personality. That great work is really mesmerizing, Madam. That we should congratulate you for involving in such a great work and restoring the
Thank you, sir.
heritage. We wish to visit it. I request Praveen
Please,
sir
please
to
come.
arrange for it once the restoration is done. We wish to visit and have a feel of it, ma'am.
You are most
It was a
welcome.
learning experience for by attending both the sessions, ma'am. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Once again, I would like to thank everyone to make this event a grand.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We would wind up the session now and everybody could leave it.
ಯಾರಿದ್ದಾರೆ? Manoj sir.
Sir.
Yes, Manoj sir.
Sir.
Sir, you can yes sir, you can sign off that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Ali sir. Are you there, sir? Ali sir. He's not there. Oh, you just inform Vivek sir.